Welcome to Episode 6, Part 3 of the Bird's Words podcast with our guest, David Williams. And I'm John Birdwell, your host. Well, in the first episode, we just learned that it's certainly not a good idea or recommended to be a driving force in the accidental ripping out of your wife's eyelashes, among some other really good stories. But as we move forward and we're back about some influence that you had at school, there's a lot of things that people remember that really means a lot to them. And so anything from peach cobbler to reenacting the Grand Ole Opry, black powder rifles, things that a lot of people might not associate with school. So why don't you give me a little rundown on your unique approach to teaching?
Okay. Well, of course, what did happen was I never really expected to have a career in education. Mm-hmm. Much of my life has just sort of fallen together day to day. I really didn't have plans and goals and all that kind of stuff. I just kind of lived life as it came. And as it turned out, much of my life just came to be unexpected. The beauty in that was everything turned out better than I could have ever expected. All right, and so I got the job at Mars Hill, and like I said, I really anticipated that I was going to have an industrial career, maybe working at Reynolds or Ford or somewhere like that. All right, but anyway, I in the construction field. But anyway, I had the opportunity. I was looking for a job. Construction work is kind of on and off. If you've got work, you can make good money, but if there's not much work to be had, there's no payday. And so looking for a steady job and opportunity presented itself. I was fortunate to get the job at Mars Hill. It took me a little while to get there. I really wanted to teach U.S. history, and in time, I was able to get the U.S. history position, and it just could not get better than that. And so I've got all of these bright kids that are well behaved, and I just enjoyed their company and all of that. I'm getting to teach a subject that I'm really motivated to teach, and I'm really interested in, and so I've got all of that going on. And in reality, instead of being a professional educator, I'm really, looking back on it, I see myself as a very well-educated hillbilly, is basically about what it amounted to.
Well, that's one of the best educations you can get in the world, and I believe that.
Right. I had grown up camping and hunting and fishing, and both in the creeks, and as I got older, we spent a lot of time on the river, where sometime we would spend a week at a time, just my friends and I camping on a big gravel bar that we had claimed for ourselves on the Tennessee River, and on like that. And when I got the job teaching U.S. history, it sort of had the reputation as being pretty dull, not very interesting. And I thought, how can that possibly be? To me, it had always been the most interesting subject of them all. And so, but I thought, something needs to be done here, to liven up the class, to make it more interesting, to make it more in touch with reality, things like that.
Real quick, I just want to say too, from a respectable source who has a ton of teaching experience, I think the EDS, that's the specialty in teaching, right?
Yes.
And from me actually testing that on a group of kids with some okra from my garden, one of the things that I was told, they said, John, you would not believe, and keep in mind, now this isn't from here, further north, they said, you would not believe that kids do not know where food comes from. And one of the things you had mentioned was livening it up, making it in touch with reality, that hillbilly education type of thing, which I really think you can learn so much from God's nature that he made. And And I was told, John, you really would not believe, and we're talking about kids that grow up near agriculture, they don't know where food comes from. And that sounds crazy, but where beef comes from, where a hamburger comes from. Now, that sounds ridiculous. Well, I did a little experiment, so I held some up for fun, and not one person identified an okra. And not that, I'm not saying that makes or break anything. However, I do think that there is a lot that is missing sometimes with the practical things in life that the world is, that started when the world was made, farming. And so when we lose touch of that, we essentially lose touch of reality. If we don't know how to grow food, where it comes from, that becomes a little bit of a challenge. And so I think what you're speaking to is one of the best forms of education, and it's that practical, hands-on experience, that wisdom. And I would have loved to have had you when I was in school, because I remember sitting in these cinder block walls thinking if I could just get out there, I could conquer the rivers, the mountains, and I was looking for adventure. And I think sometimes you take these kids, and some might have a ton of energy, or they might have this desire to do certain things. You put them in the classroom for a long time. Not that there's not some really beneficial things that come out of it, but some people might be a little more equipped to do some hands-on things outside, and to go out there and conquer some things. And so hearing about these black powder rifles and cooking peach cobbler in a Dutch oven, I like your style. I like your style.
Well, thank you. And I might point out maybe some of the things that we did, that the kids enjoyed, and I think they really learned from. And for instance, every year in U.S. History 1, we went to Shiloh. Of course, with the Shiloh trip came lunch at the historic Catfish Hotel. And the Catfish Hotel was a historic place in itself, plus food's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And the kids always enjoyed that, and that got passed on down the line. And all the kids coming into U.S. History 1 were wanting to know when we were heading to the Catfish Hotel. And so like I said, we would spend the morning on the battlefield. We had already done a lot of prep work as to what happened there, and and how it fit into the War for Southern Independence and all of that. Also, we would do American Indian projects, and they would work in teams, and they had to make something authentic. They could take some shortcuts. They would be as authentic as they could, but our time was limited. But they were expected to make something, or at least do their best to make something that was actually functional, and all. And so they're out there napping flint, working with bow drills, starting fires, mm-hmm. just on and on like that. And for the group that came through when we were doing that, that seems to be the thing that they remembered the most. We did Wild West Day, and we were talking about the history of the West and the cattle drives, the railroads, and all of that. And oftentimes that's when we we're doing sort of outdoor cooking as though we were on the cattle drive, and good food for the cowboys was very important. And so we would cook peach cobblers in Dutch ovens over hot coals.
Yeah, I actually remember. I don't think I ever got to try it. But I think I was doing security for a little bit at that time, and I think I saw them in the Dutch ovens, that is.
Yes. I kept 3 12-inch Dutch ovens, in the room at all times, mm-hmm. and we used them for that. We sometimes just did the cobblers just because we wanted a cobbler, But everything was done outside, and the kids, sometimes they did it for themselves. Other times I would show them about, how to light the fires, set up the coals, cook in the Dutch ovens with no electricity, no natural gas, anything like that, just using, what you had available. during that time we had shooting matches on the front yard. This was with lever action BB rifles. I might say that Mr. Rutherford, especially in the latter time, when he was the principal here, very understanding, very trusting to let us do that. We never had an accident, or problem there.
Yeah.
But we would do that. I had a competitive level lariat, and we would do some roping, out there, and kind of on the trail or camp sing-alongs.
Yeah.
And the kids.
What did you notice about the kids? Because I imagine some people are thinking that they would probably be very distrustful to do that with some of the kids. But what did you notice about the kids when you gave them a little bit of that trust?
Well, some of this stuff, especially for instance, we also did Saturday Night at the Opry, where we did a pretend episode of the Grand Ole Opry with commercials and an inspirational segment and classic country songs and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes the kids were, they were a little uncertain if they really wanted to get involved in all this. They're not, this is. And I told them, I said, being a child of the '60s, I said, I'm an expert here. And I said, what happens is what you have to do to become super cool, you have to become uncool, so uncool that you eventually cross the line into super coolness. And I said, kind of trust me on this because I know what I'm talking about here. Well, anyway, eventually, most everybody got comfortable with it. The sing-alongs, a lot of them, they were glad to have a sing-along every day if they could have one. And of course, we did some period songs, but we also did, you might say 60s and 70s tunes that we could apply to certain historical events or characters. For instance, we did Van Morrison's Tupelo Honey.
Yeah.
And we typically dedicated that to the great love story between Andrew and Rachel Jackson. There and things like that, and the kids came to really enjoy that, and it put some pressure on me because I think a lot of the kids came to U.S. history class, and their expectations are pretty high. They're expecting something to happen. There's something to do, and so with the cooking and with the opera, with the Indian projects, we had the Rocky Mountain campfire contest where the kids started a campfire with flint and steel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and of course the winners in the contests typically got a Hershey bar, and a certificate.
Yeah.
We did the Charles Augustus Lindbergh paper airplane contest, which was a pretty big event, and all of this was history connected. Some of the concern was, though, there was some concern that we were just having so much fun that how could this be a good history class? History's not supposed to be fun.
You're right. It's like you're having so much fun. Can this actually be productive? Can we actually be learning anything? You can enjoy your work.
Right, and the thing of it is, we were actually learning in the first person. We weren't just hearing about it. We're out there seeing what it takes.
I have seen it, and you see it in their eyes, especially. But kids, if you just throw a lecture on them, they're so gone. Oh. They're not there. And it might impress some people. Sometimes when you do things that, like you said, are first person, and they're like, whoa, I can actually do this. I get to actually. I can think and I can make mistakes and I can do this. And you see this fire, figuratively come alive inside of them. And they almost shift into a different person. They're less zombie-like.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, whoa. And a lot of times, I don't know if you found this too, sometimes kids that can be quite challenging, they actually thrive making the fires and doing things like that.
Oh, yes. So, There were, I'm sure, plenty of kids that just weren't all that interested in U.S. history, but they really enjoyed the projects, and the projects drew them into the study.
Yeah. Well, the learning was a byproduct. Like you said, you integrated everything so that you do it, and then you learn, and you're probably more likely to remember that building a fire and thinking about the travel out west than you would be just zoned out.
Right. Those Indian projects, it was tough to make a bow and an arrow that actually works.
Yeah.
And so, things like that. I think, of course, I think it was the best teaching that I did. So, that was the type thing that I tried to incorporate into all my history classes as much as we could possibly, do that.
Yeah. So the black powder rifle. So you had to notify some people and.
Oh yes, yeah. The gun was loud. Of course, we weren't shooting a projectile.
Yeah.
Although I did make some modeling clay bullets that we shot, so we could actually shoot targets. They were minimally effective. It was hard to make them really work good, but they did work some. But we're basically they have a target to shoot at. They're going through the process of aiming the rifle. Well, they first went through the process of loading it. The kids would load it themselves, and then you go through the mechanics of aiming the rifle and, taking aim and firing and all. And, that was something that the kids really looked forward to. Of course, like I said, we'd have to give notice to everyone around, that this was going. Sometimes we even
preparing to defend the hill over here.
right, and we would sometime, and I think I left this up to the principal and all, but they would notify Florence Police Department, that there were going to be shots fired on the Mars Hill campus, and if a neighbor, someone across the street from the school or whatever, called in that this was a U.S. history demonstration. On one occasion, we actually fired a cannon, there, and then early on, we got where we couldn't do this, but we sometimes actually went up on the hill and shot gallon jugs of water with a high-powered rifle.
Yeah.
And that was we were shooting a rifle that World War I, World War II, type rifle, and taking a look at what you had there and all that. And
I can say with pretty decent confidence here that very few students will get that that level.
Yeah. Well, I ran into a student just a few days ago, and he mentioned that in college, when he told his friends that we had shot a rifle at school and all that, and he said they just couldn't believe it. They just couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And,
did you ever worry? Did you ever think, I might get in trouble for this? Or
well, of course, and what I told the kids, and this was true, and that is that when I brought guns to school for display, which I did that a lot, and all, but I wanted them to be sure to know that I had cleared that with the Florence Police Department.
All the proper authorities.
Yes, with the FBI even.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, and actually what had happened there was, I knew some of the guys, Florence PD.
Mm-hmm.
I had talked to them about it, made sure they were comfortable with it, and all. At the time, I was a recreational weightlifter, and one of the local FBI agents, we were in the weight room together a lot, and I had talked to him about it, so he knew what was going on, and basically their approach was, as long as your school administration is good with it
on private property.
Yes, then you're not going to have a problem with law enforcement. That's what everybody said, and school administration was good with it, so it was cleared with them. Yeah. And so I always was sure to tell the kids that before you go home and tell your parents that this crazy history teacher brought all these guns to school and all, be sure you tell them, that I'm cleared through all the proper channels, to do that.
Yeah,
you know,
and only a few are going to participate.
Yeah.
Even then, who are going to
well, yes.
actively.
Of course, the on the exhibits, the kids all got to handle the guns.
Oh, yeah, okay.
It was that not everybody got to shoot one. We just didn't have the time.
Right.
But anyway, we were very careful, and I was always, very concerned about anybody even just being careless or anything like that. We wanted to be really sure, and so we.
Well, in your 50-year track record, you seem to be very successful with training and doing it safely. So.
Of course, I had been a shooter all my life, but gun safety was absolutely
critical.
It's one of those things that just had to be, and the kids, I mean, they understood. They were very careful.
Well, it's also probably why so many people and so many kids have these memories, and they even put them in the legendary category because they had such a such an opportunity to experience that. And last thing, we recorded a separate video, but the Oreo education, which the big meaning behind that was that you have to go a little further. You want to tie that up with a bow to make sure that the right lesson. You said some kids forget the lesson and they remember the Oreo. So what was the big lesson there, that you have to go a little further?
Right. In other words, I tried to compact the lesson into a simple statement, and that was that excellent results require extra effort. And the point was, in school, in life, wherever you go, to do your very best and to accomplish the very most, it's going to take extra effort. You're going to have to do more than just the average to excel. And so that was the point. And we always did that early in the school year. And that's when I went through my 4 class rules. We only had 4 rules. And that was: be on time, come prepared, mind your manners, be honest. And so the whole class, all the classes basically ran on those 4 rules.
Yeah, those 4 pillars. Those are good ones to have. Now, a couple more questions before we bring it to a close. I was speaking with my father-in-law, Jeff. Chris was nearby. If you remember, I think they were your last basketball team before you resigned and stepped away.
Right.
And I'm sure it felt like history was written wrong that year. But one of the things that Jeff mentioned was you had this challenge that if someone dunked a basketball, that you would bring them a steak dinner on a silver platter. And so I have to say, he said he did it. Yeah. And he said you brought him one. So what's the story behind that?
Well, actually, and of course, I'm trying to, encourage the athletes to, increase their skills and their physical strength, and and all of that goes with basketball. And some of the guys, of course, this was offered when they basically first came into the high school program like that, and it was that when you dunk the ball the first time, then I'll buy you a steak dinner, and I'll bring it to the cafeteria and serve it to you in front of all of your friends and all of the high school that's in the cafeteria at that time. And so that was sort of a standing arrangement. Of course, I had to see them dunk the ball. Mm-hmm. All right, so the first time that they, would dunk the ball for me, then, at the next available opportunity, then I would bring them a steak dinner, for lunch during lunchtime, and they would enjoy a steak dinner. I usually draped a towel over my arm there like a waiter, I came in with the steak dinner and all.
That is quite
and put it in front of them, and we'd all just have a laugh, but it was just kind of a fun way to maybe put an incentive there, to up your skill levels, to up your athletic ability some.
Celebrate some achievements and milestones.
That's right, exactly. It was a celebration of a significant athletic achievement, Yeah. And a guy like Jeff was, your father-in-law, was very athletic, but he wasn't real tall, anything like that. And for a guy his size to come in there and dunk the basketball, I mean, that was quite an achievement. there weren't many people his height who could dunk the ball anywhere.
Yeah,
and so,
those are special memories for a lot of people.
That was just one thing that I did, and I might point out, he was on the last varsity team that I coached, but as it turned out, I wound up coaching a few more years later. I skipped some time, came back, and coached some junior high ball, which I enjoyed a lot. But '97 was my last year to coach, and the coaching experience was another one of those things that was just an irreplaceable part of my life and all that. But by 1997, it was obvious to me that it was time to pursue some other interests and let that go.
Did you have decided in your mind that there's never a good time, it just has to be done?
Yeah, and it was time. I mean, it was good for the program. It was good for me personally, and good for the kids and all. And so, it was just. I know they wrote up in the paper, and when they wrote that up in the paper, they did the usual thing where they quoted me as saying it was a really hard decision, which they always say that. I mean, well, I never said that.
Well, let's set the record straight.
It was about the easiest decision I'd ever made in my life. All right, because it was just a matter of timing. I mean, I came to recognize that it was time for me to move out. It was time for somebody else to move in.
And coaching's not easy.
Right.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing.
In any kind of athletics, whether you're a coach or an athlete or whatever, I think you need to realize that you've basically done what you can do, and it's time to turn it over to somebody else. And so, for me, I mean, it wasn't one of those things. It was thought through, and all of that, and so it just wasn't. It wasn't a difficult. I think some people. I'd been there for a long time. I think some people expected it to be difficult or whatever. It wasn't difficult at all, and as it all turned out, it was the best decision for everybody, and so that has to go down as one of the best decisions that I ever made. And that's when I really became you might say a full-time classroom teacher, where I could focus on my
you redirected a little bit of energy there
on my U.S. history teaching, and that gave me the time for these project works and for things that I wanted to do, and it all worked out there. And I was really fortunate to work with some really terrific athletes over the years, and the whole competitive athletics. Of course, I had played basketball when I was a student, ran track when I was a student, and also that was something I was familiar with. But I said it was time to turn things over to somebody else and move on to other parts of my life.
You lived out that chapter and went to the next one. All right, well, it's evident that you love these kids, and I've heard a few talk about your unique and strategic plan for if there was ever a school intruder.
Okay. Well, very protective of my kids. And I always felt that of all the responsibilities that a teacher has, the safety of your students is number one. All right, and so I attended some special classes and some workshops and so forth, in the late 1990s, from then on, there were these tragic school shootings, that were happening all over the country and all that. And I was determined that should anything like that ever happen at Mars Hill, that we would have a plan. And of course, I actually did not reveal the entire plan because that part of it involved me. But I basically said, here's what we're going to do. And of course, I made it a habit of keeping my classroom door locked. All right, but there were ways of getting into that room anyway. It would take some effort, but they could get in. And so we had a plan where if the school was locked down And we did have an intruder that was able to somehow enter through the classroom door.
Yeah, a persistent attacker who's trying to get in and won't stop.
Right.
Yeah.
And we found that even though we had a substantial door, if he broke out the window, he could reach in, take the inside doorknob, and just open the door.
Mm-hmm.
And, the window was heavy glass, but it wasn't bulletproof and it wasn't break-proof. It was break-resistant, but anyway. And, the law enforcement was trying to learn what to do, how to deal with this. And first, it was basically just hide out, be still, be quiet. And they found out that was simply just not effective. So that changed from basically doing anything you could to defend yourself and to discourage the school shooter, from doing what he intended to do.
Yeah, a phrase that they taught us was the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And you could probably add in, or a weapon, or a railroad spike, or whatever you have.
Well, what happened was in one of our workshops, local law enforcement here said, if they get in the room with you, fight them, resist them, throw books, throw desks, whatever you can, attack them if you can, because these people, they have no conscience, and they're there just to kill other people. And they said no matter what you say, they're going to shoot you anyway. And they gave examples, and we saw some actual video that was just
horrendous.
Yes, it just and school kids begging for their lives, and it made no difference.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, it so happened that we did an activity where we drove railroad spikes into a cross tie with an actual old-timey spike maul, like the railroad builders used back in the day.
Yeah, integrating that history.
Right, and so I had a large number, a couple of buckets of railroad spikes that one of the parents had donated. He was a railroad worker and all that, and so every year some of the people got a chance to actually drive a spike, with a spike maul into a cross tie. But I had those surplus spikes, and I thought about it, and I thought those things are heavy enough, and they have one sharp end. Even if you didn't strike the target with the sharp end, they do quite a bit of damage to rear back and throw that spike. Yeah. And it was just about right to where you could really throw it hard.
Yeah, right? To do some serious damage if it landed, yeah.
And so when we had lockdowns, we had our corner that we all went into. The lights were shut off. Of course, the door was already locked and everything. But every student got 2 railroad spikes. All right. And, the idea was that if the intruder got through the door, we were facing that corner of the room. And so everybody would throw their first railroad spike. All right. And the idea,
if entry is made from the intruder, first one, throw the spike.
And then we all threw those spikes. Well, the idea was that whether we hit him or not, there was a good chance with that many spikes in the air, somebody's going to hit him.
Yeah.
He's going to have to at least react to all of that metal flying in the air.
Yeah. They probably didn't train for that scenario.
Right, and he's expecting to be in charge, and now he's not in charge anymore. At least,
there's a little chaos introduced right here.
Exactly, unexpected chaos. All right, and then the idea though was we had been told that if we were able to interrupt the shooter like that, all right, then it was just necessary to rush him, and disable or disarm him.
Yeah, this is one of the worst possible situations anyone could ever find them in, and automatically it's already a tragic, traumatic, devastating situation.
Right.
And so, this is that moment that you're trying to prepare for in some way.
Right, and I tried to prepare him for the fact that we're all going to be more afraid than we have probably ever been in our entire lives. But we need a plan. We need something that we don't try to organize on the spot. All right, and so we got them ready, and the idea was we throw the first spike, and then we rush the intruder, and we finish him with the second spike. Okay. All right. Okay. And so,
Oh man.
it was kind of funny. I would joke about it, but I'd say, some of the guys look like they're not going to be able to do this. And I said, some of the girls look like they've been waiting for this their entire life. All right. So anyway, that's what we had, and it was interesting. I think it gave the kids confidence that in my room they were going to be in the safest place possible.
Yeah.
That we had a plan. If anything really terrible like that happened, at least we knew what we were going to do. And I had lots of kids come by, former kids, and maybe even some kids that had on occasion they would say, if we ever have a school shooter, they'd say, Coach, I'm coming to your room.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, when you hear a plan like that,
And I told them that I said, I don't think it'll happen here.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, the thing of it is, at all those other schools, they didn't think it would happen at their school either.
Thought the same thing.
And I said, even though I think the chances are, because of the kind of community that we have and the kind of school that we are and all that, but I said, in spite of that, I said, we need a plan.
Yeah.
I said, because it has happened, it could happen, and we need a plan.
Yeah. Well, it's terrible that we even have to think about it and worry about it. But I think, on a very primal level, kids, it's a need. You have to feel safe at school, especially if you want to learn. And so sometimes not talking about it and seeing these things happening on the news, it seems like if you introduced a plan like that, just kind of talking about it, having a plan, acknowledging it, it almost might even shut down some of that anxiety because some people have that they feel helpless, and so they might actually unlock a little bit of that aggression and that primal fight response.
True. Well, to preface all that, I had already told them, of course, the way we were set up and everything, I said, if a shooter gets through that door, I said, that's where I'm going to confront him. I'm going to confront him in the doorway. And, I wasn't sure how appropriate it was to tell them this, but I did tell them. I said, my plan is, I'm not going to tell you how, but I said, I'm going to kill that man in the doorway. And I said, the only thing that you need to be concerned about is if he somehow gets through me, then you come through the spikes. But I said, I guarantee you, on my life, he's not getting through me. But if somehow he manages that, he said, you're part of this plan. My part is plan A. I'm not going to give you the details there. But I said, I practice this, and I know you're going to feel kind of strange, and you're probably not going to take me seriously. You mean the history teacher practices killing somebody in his classroom? And I said, yes, I do. And I had written on the board, up in the left-hand corner, a little message where it said N1HMK. Okay, that stayed up there all the time. And I said, I live in this room, and I want to see that every day. I want you to see that every day because you know that I wrote that there, and what that stands for is no one harms my kids. Okay. And I said, you've got to have that embedded in your mentality, or when the time comes, you'll panic, And all right, and so I said, when I eat lunch at my desk, I see that on the board. When I'm sitting at my desk in front of school before the school day begins, I see that on my board, and I want that always in mind because I said, if that should happen, I said, you're going to see me angrier than you ever could have imagined that I could possibly be. And I said, you're going to see some other people here in school. You're going to see a side of them that you never dreamed were possible. All these friendly, warm people are all of a sudden, their personalities are going to change. But I said, point being is, plan A, I stop him at the door. Plan B, he gets spiked if he gets inside the door. And I said, we basically need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. Well, in a world where people will hurt kids and not have a conscience and take innocent lives on that spectrum.
Yes.
And so many people who are out there who will do various forms of harm. It certainly is refreshing to hear about someone who tries to create such a level of safety and prepares for it that if people send their kids to a place, that they've got a plan to protect them.
Well, we had the plan. Fortunately, we never had to use it.
Fortunately, yeah. and hopefully no one ever will have to. But
I think, though, that I was successful in creating, an atmosphere of safety, in that place. And then so I think it was good for the kids. And
yeah, I'm sure. It's unorthodox, and I'm sure that some people have their doubts and reservations about it. But when it comes down to it, preparing to preserve life and taking that seriously, right, I think is a good thing compared to dismissing any possible threat that could happen.
Well, and I think sometimes we can be, like I said, a little arrogant, where we believe that something like that could never happen to us. It happens to other people, but it could never happen to us. And I told the kids, I said, really, you don't really need to tell anybody else about this. I said, I'm not trying to necessarily, keep this a secret or whatever, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be spread around everywhere. But I think it's just something that we owe to ourselves. And I said, we owe this to our classmates, the other kids in this school too. And so we're just trying to be prepared for the worst case scenario.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And last question is this: your faith. How has God shaped your faith through the years? And so can you talk about that a little bit?
Of course. Well, of course, I began at Mars Hill in 1957 as a first grader. I had Christian teachers. I came from a family where both sides of my family were Christian people. They were typically church leaders. They were really sincerely good people. And that got passed on to me, both in word and in action. I'll have to say that I grew up realizing that I really had a lot to live up to. My grandfather and my father were real role models to me. As I grew up, I had older men that I worked for. Particularly a man named Buck James, who was my construction boss when I worked there. Buck was an elder in the church. He had a lot of responsibility. There was a lot of pressure on him, but he was a true Christian man. So in reality, it was easy for me to adopt Christian standards. Now, I'll have to say that I didn't necessarily always stay on the path. I admit, that sometimes I got off the path.
Well, I think when we study the lives of the disciples with Jesus, I think we all fall off the path sometimes.
Right. Well, kind of like the prodigal son.
Yeah.
When I came to myself, I would always get back on the track. And and I'll have to say, throughout the course of my life, if I did something wrong, I'll have to admit, I knew it was wrong when I did it.
Yeah.
It was just a weakness.
I think most of the time we probably do.
Yeah. I was never surprised that something I did was considered to be wrong. I knew it was. I just made mistakes along the way.
Yeah, got to walk the watermelon back to the porch.
That's right. Stealing a watermelon is still stealing no matter what.
That's it. Yeah.
And so, I think that was very much, you might say, embedded, into my personality. And I'll have to say that when I did make mistakes, it was personally very disappointing to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was truly sorry, for either what I had done or what I should have done but didn't do, and so I had pretty much life well charted for me, by the people that I was around. Family was one, but then all that association at Mars Hill, and I would tell the kids, I said, you're always being told that the younger kids look up to you, and you should be aware of that. And all that.
I see that theme a lot. Yeah.
But I said, you need to understand this. And I said, people like me, you encourage me to do the right thing. And I said, sometimes when I'm tempted to do the wrong thing or not do the right thing, I have to think, what would my kids think about that? I say to myself, what would they think of me, if I did that or if I reacted that way or whatever? And I tell the kids, you help me to be a better person.
Yeah.
And I said, I hope I help you, but I know that you help me, to be the kind of person that I ought to be.
Yeah, I've heard that called leading upward, but that what you touched on about, becoming a dad too. We make mistakes, but there's something about when you are blessed with a child, and it is just, it seems so, it hits you on a whole nother level when you do something wrong and you just think, what would my child think of me?
Yes.
Right. And the thing is, they are going to see us make mistakes. They're going to see our humanness and our shortcomings and our weaknesses. Right. I'm reminded of that scripture where God says, my grace is sufficient for thee. And part of it is navigating that, realizing that. But that's an immense pressure. You're right. That's an immense driving force to do the right thing sometimes, that sometimes kids might not know that for a long time. But you're right, that they have the ability and the opportunity to be inspirational for people as well.
Well, I would think to myself, if I let them down, how could I ever get past that? Even if it was something that was wrong and God forgave me for that, could I ever forgive myself for letting these kids down? And, it was very obvious to me all through the time that there were students at Mars Hill that were better people than I was, maybe better people than I am, and like I said, I had examples, you might say, above me in school administration and family and all that, and then I'm sandwiched. I have examples of the kids that are coming up, and I'll tell you what, if I either had turned out badly or if I somehow turn out badly, there's no excuse. There's just no excuse. Nobody who ever lived had a better reason, for being a true Christian person.
Well, it's wonderful that in your personal Christian faith with God that you attribute a lot of where you are spiritually to the good people that surrounded you and pointed you the right direction. And that's another good reminder to not take for granted what we have and who we have in our life, and to surround ourselves with good people with the correct biblical values too. Yeah. That's a great reminder. Well, it sounds like a class I would have really enjoyed being in, with the faith element and peach cobbler in the morning, and attacking an intruder and stopping him in the fatal funnel at lunch, and everything in between. That sounds like a really unique one. You know, you might wake up to the smell of black powder coming in here.
That's right. I love that. Well, and I just want to thank you for letting me be a part of your podcast, and I hope maybe something that was said today will be a little helpful to someone along the way.
Well, thank you for being here. Honored to have you, and thank you for sharing all of your life experiences, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
We hope that you have found this to be another meaningful episode, and thank you so much for being a part of the Birds Words podcast community and for being a loyal follower. We'll see you on the next one.